Welcome to Cover Book Beat. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. This is program number 861, and it's a bit different today. Normally, we interview authors about works they have created. This time, we have somebody who has translated a work which is equally as difficult and takes a long time. And we are really delighted. In 1 second, I'm going to edit this because I have another interview after this and I grabbed the wrong cheat sheets.
Sure.
We'll fix that.
Okay.
All right. Instead of interviewing an author about his original work, we're interviewing a translator about his original translation of a classic book from Italian to English. What's more, our guest has a literary pedigree, and that Stephen Riggio is the former CEO of Barnes & Noble. And during his 40-year tenure, he took the company from a single flagship store in New York City to a national retailer. His retirement gave him a chance to explore his Italian heritage and by taking language classes. His teacher just happened to mention that the classic Sicilian novel Luigi Natoli's I Biti Paola lacked a translation into English, and he was intrigued enough to tackle the project. Now we have a new title, Luigi Natoli's Sicilian Avengers, a novel, books 1 and 2. The book's a bit of a swashbuckler set in the late 1700s, early 1800s. I love this description. A tale of history and adventure, love and hatred, friendship and betrayal, suffering and retribution, and featuring Beati Paola, a possible precursor of the mafia. We're very pleased to welcome Stephen Riggio.
Good morning. It's great to be with you.
I have to ask this. You have expert experience marketing other people's creativity in retail. How much of that was able to transfer into marketing your own creativity? Did you have to get an agent? How did that whole thing work for you?
After almost 40 years of selling books from other writers and serving other writers, this was something new for me. I was on the other side of the coin, so to speak. And every time a writer would come to me and say, well, you're the CEO of Barnes & Noble. Could you tell me what makes a book sell? What do I have to do? And I would say, if I knew the answer to that, I would be one of the most powerful people in the world. But I would usually tell them, in addition to the work that the publisher does, if they so had the wherewithal and perhaps the money to hire their own publicist and to get out there on their own and talk about their book and promote their book as much as they could. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it works out so well. I mean, I have one author I've interviewed 11 times because twice a year, like clockwork, he comes out with
Yeah.
a new book. So
Yeah.
it's amazing. Well, this is a major project to tackle. I mean, the combination is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 pages long. Was this at least in part inspired by your wife's desire not to have you underfoot in your retirement?
That's a good question. Not really, because the project was born. It has an interesting arc, let's say.
Okay.
I am of Sicilian blood, so I have Sicilian ancestry in my background. My grandmother was born in Sicily, and she used to read to me in Italian when I was a young kid from the Italian language newspaper. I studied Italian in school, but I dropped it at some point in my life. In 2008, we lost our daughter, Melissa, to leukemia after a year-long struggle. And I was looking for a way for Laura and I, my wife and I, to find a way forward. And I wanted to open a new chapter for us, a new door, so to speak. So I came up with the idea of taking Italian language lessons together, studying the language. It was a way for me to get back to the language and for her to come with me on this journey. And a couple of years into this, these studies, our teacher gave us this book. We fell in love with it. It's an amazing historical tale, a rich historical novel. And what I wanted to do was to compare the book that we were reading in Italian to the English version. And I discovered it didn't exist.
Uh,
So after a career of doing audacious things in the retail business, in the book selling business, opening up these big stores that nobody ever expected would work. I said, well, instead of me translating something of 200 pages. Let me do something audacious. It's 1,000 pages. And I questioned myself, can I do this? And I challenged myself to, well, why don't I asked myself, why don't you translate one page? Why don't you just do one page and see if there's something there that grabs you, that you feel you can go to the finish line? So I did that, and I gave it to our Italian professor, and she sent it back with all kinds of corrections. So that began the journey, and she and one other person were with me through this entire translation, helping me make it not just faithful to the original writer's tale, but to make it enjoyable for the English reader. Because the book was written 100 years ago. So I had to, for lack of a better word, to modernize it a bit.
Let me talk a little bit about process. You just didn't type the whole thing into Google and hit button translate. What tools or resources did you use to pull all this together?
Well, unlike writing a novel or a book with a blank page, I'm translating someone else's words. And what I did was I wrote it out first in hand on yellow pads. And in my office, I have an army or a shelf full of Italian dictionaries, not just modern dictionaries, but dictionaries from the 19th century, where you could find alternate meanings of words that might be more accurate than a modern dictionary. So I did that, and I went through after finishing the book in Italian, I went back to begin translating it because I wanted to understand the arc of the story and make sure I had that under my belt. And so it just began with longhand. Then I put it into a computer. I typed it in. While I was typing it, I made my own corrections because I felt, a word could be better than others. And we brought it to a publisher, and we hired an editor to look at the English version without, the editor actually knew Italian, but she came at it with an angle of let's make it readable as we can. And she was a great help. And I think every writer will tell you that a great editor is their best ally.
As a newspaper and radio newsman for many years, thank God for editors.
Yeah, of course.
More than once. So
I've often said they're the most important people in publishing because they could make the book usually they could make the book better. And it was a great process because I like being challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And I like people to, provide me with not just a challenge, but a learning experience. And that was very gratifying to do that. And I feel more confident in my Italian now after having translated 400,000 words.
Oh, jeez. Let me go back to something you touched on briefly before, and that is the age of it. This was written over a century ago. Style, substance. You had to make adjustments because I felt as if I was reading it that was contemporarily written. So I think you totally succeeded in that.
Right.
The other aspect that occurred to me was I kept reading it. I kept hearing opera in my head. And I know it was made into a movie. By any chance, did you chase that down and see it?
It was made in 1948. You could look at it on YouTube. It's very grainy and very hard to kind of get into, and the sound isn't very good. But interestingly, a few years ago, the Leone Film Group, which is a famous Italian film company, they announced that they were going to make a TV series out of it. It hasn't come to fruition yet, but it is operatic. I agree with you. It has a very, very big arc. It's quite like a novel by Alexander Dumas, The Count of Monte Cristo, or The Three Musketeers. It has that kind of sweep. And at the heart of it, it's a story about justice. And in the background is this shadowy secret sect that meets in underground caves in Palermo's and holds their tribunals in the dark, wearing hoods and masks. So it's very, very full of intrigue, and without revealing too much of the plot, but there's a love story, there's betrayals, there's alliances that fracture and then kind of rekindle, and until the end of the book, where everything is well, I would say everything is resolved in a way, but not quite, because we are reading the sequel to the book now. And the book that I translated is 1,000 pages. The sequel is 1,700 pages.
Oh,
so I'm going to be quite busy for the next few years.
yeah. I'm interested if you've ever done any research. They touch in about my
Right.
Italian is only worse than my Swahili. Beati
Okay.
Paoli, is that the way you would say that?
Beati Paoli.
Okay. And the origin apparently is it has to do with the Blessed Pauls, but you don't know which Paul I'm referring to. Do you have a theory on that yourself?
I don't. I think some scholars have weighed in on that. There is no real answer to that. The members of the Beati Paoli do dress as monks during the day, and the monks of San Francesco di Paola, and who led obviously an ascetic life, and they sit in the pews of the churches in Palermo, and they listen to commoners who have claims of being the victims of an injustice, and then they leave the church and they go into their tribunals. So it's more that it's not as much as the name is important as what they did. And although they are considered to be ancestors or forerunners, it might be a better word, of the mafia, I consider them to be more like a Robin Hood gang.
Yeah.
And I don't think people would want to root for the mafia, but people do root for a Robin Hood type gang, if you will, in a story like this.
It's a common, I want to use the word meme, but a common theme, not just there. I, back in college, did a report on the Tupamaros, which were a revolutionary group in Uruguay that acted very much like that, would, or like the early Black Panthers doing feeding children for breakfast and things like that. So the concept is out there, but this, I think, probably is maybe the earliest examination of it, any kind of detail. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about the book itself. I also want to mention that this is very contemporary. This is Italian American Heritage Month, and you are of Italian descent. I'm curious, had you been to Sicily before you started this project, and have you been since?
That's a great question. I had never been to Sicily. My paternal grandparents were born there. They emigrated here at the early part of the century, but never went back. Neither did any of their 7 children. And I have 15 cousins. None of us ever went back to Sicily until I did at the ripe young age of 60. And we've been back to the island 4 times. Parallel to doing the translation of this book, I dug into my own family's ancestry and had traced it back 400 years.
Oh, fantastic.
And discovered living relatives there who we have connected with. And to top it all off, I often say it was my destiny to translate this book because of my Sicilian heritage, studying the language with my wife, Laura. And then while researching my family's history, I find that my grandfather was an orphan, as is the main character in Sicilian Avengers.
Yes.
So all of these things come together, running almost parallel. And we've been to Sicily now 4 times. What I would like for people to do, besides enjoying the story and immersing themselves in another time period, is to come away with it with a different view of Sicilian Americans, a different view than that has been portrayed in the stereotypical portrayals in the media by, as we know, what films and what TV series and what books have done. What I have discovered about Sicily since doing quite a bit of research about it, as we know, it was invaded and dominated and settled for over 2,000 years by Greeks, Romans, Phoenicians, Normans, Arabs, Spanish. What's important about Sicily is that people talk about America as a nation of immigrants and about New York City as a melting pot. Well, Sicily has it beat on every front. It is such a rich culture. And while it was dominated by all these cultures, it actually absorbed them. You can go into some of these churches in Sicily and actually in one building see Greek, Roman, Norman, Arab, and Byzantine elements in the architecture. Now, that's a building. Okay. What resonance do buildings have? Well, I think the people also have that heritage. You could feel it in their language, which has a lot of Arabic origins. You know, Sicilian is a different language than Italian. I don't speak Sicilian, but I have relatives there that do. It's in the food, and interestingly, well, Sicily was not part of Italy until 1861. So there's 2,000 years of being not Italian. And Sicilians will tell you themselves they are Sicilian first, and then they are Italian. So they're proud of both, but there's something called Sicilian pride. And I have that, and it has been amplified. During the process, the parallel process of translating this book, researching Sicilian history, finding out about my ancestry. So it's all come together in something quite emotional for me.
One of the things you mentioned is you want people to know more about it. I have to say that we in the US do not study world history in any way other than superficially. People are probably not really aware of Sicily's independence from Italy up until, as you point out, 1860. Italy was a whole bunch of fractured states for a long, long time before they coalesced underneath. Are you hoping this book might spur a few more readers to look into not just Sicily's current history, but the real rich history of its past?
Oh, it is so rich. It's amazing. And as I said before, I had never been there until I was 60 years old. I had never actually read Sicilian history. I read some Italian novels. If I may offer a book recommendation, it would be after you read Sicilian Avengers. If you haven't read Lampedusa's The Leopard, that is one of the greatest novels ever written, not just Italian or Sicilian novels. And that takes place around the time of Italian independence in the early 1860s. Yes, I think understanding how central Sicily was to European history, because it was right in the middle of the Mediterranean and it was contested for by both Eastern and Northern and North African powers. It offers a good understanding of the sweep of history in the early Middle Ages, especially right up through the Risorgimento. It's a fascinating period. And I'm particularly fascinated by the Norman period. The Normans were French knights that came down from Normandy and invaded or expelled the previous rulers who were Arab. And people don't realize that Sicily was ruled by Arabs for 200 years. And there were literally thousands of mosques in Sicily at that time. The king of the Norman king, Roger II, spoke fluent Arabic, and he actually kept on Arabic administrators because they were so expert and professional at what they do. So that period for me was very fascinating. And it was an amazingly, for the time, we're looking at it at a distant mirror, but for the time, it was an amazingly tolerant society, which is something that it's kind of hard to grasp today, but it was.
Yeah. Europe did not have that same pleasure over the same time period, I'm sorry to say. Yeah. I'm going to throw one other thing at you because we're getting close to the time I have to
Sure.
let you go. But did your relationship with Luigi Natoli change over the time that you did the translation?
This is the first book I've ever translated, and I'm sure every translator can answer that question in their own way. I do think that he was in the back of my mind throughout the whole process, and I hope that I got to know him better as I proceeded through the book. It was my goal to be faithful to him and to make his story come alive, but with my words. And I can only hope that I did a good job. And I don't know if his descendants are around, but I do hope that people feel that the book reads well and spurs an interest in them in Sicily. And I would like them to close the last page of the book and then buy a plane ticket to Sicily. That's what I would like. And that would be my tribute to him.
Oh, that's a great way to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Let's mention websites and how people can find out more about you.
I have a website. It's called SicilianAvengers.com. You could read more about the book itself, about me. And for people that have read the book, I've put a lot of additional content and photographs of Sicily, both of the present time period as well as, back pieces of art from hundreds of years ago. So I think it'll help people that want to know more about the period.
Fantastic indeed. And are we looking for the next book to come out anytime soon?
I'm working on it, so stay tuned.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much today. Our guest is Stephen Riggio, and the book is Luigi Natoli, Sicilian Avengers, a novel, books 1 and 2. Thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciated that.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be with you.